Welcome back to Focus Today, and wow, what a great honor to have with us today our good friend Dr. Herb London. He is the president of the London Center for Policy Research, and we have a lot to talk to him about. By the way, going to his website's a great resource, londoncenter.org, londoncenter.org. Dr. London, good to see you, my friend.
Oh, pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me wish you a Happy New Year.
Oh, likewise. Happy New Year to you, too. Well, boy, it's been an incredible couple of days here, from the UN Security Council resolution to an unbelievably long, arrogant, condescending speech by Secretary of State John Kerry, actually scolding Israel. What in the world have we done to ourselves?
Well, I think this administration obviously is engaged in a swan song, and the swan song is taking the mask off the administration and demonstrating the full antipathy towards the state of Israel.
Why?
Why? I think Obama has tilted in the direction of a Palestinian state. What he has said from the outset in the Cairo speech in 2009 is he's going to reset his relationship with the Muslim nations, and this is one way to do so. Obviously, this is the full efflorescence of the Obama administration. Change the character of world affairs, change the relationship between Israel and the United States, and obviously change the relationship between Israel and the Palestinian territory.
You know, what's interesting about this, we're now seeing pushback from fairly prominent Democrats, and even Hollywood are saying the president's gone too far. Roseanne Barr calls it Nazism. That's pretty substantial, isn't it?
Well, it is substantial, but I mean, it's very obvious that what has happened here is that the administration is now saying that any of the Israeli occupations in the West Bank or in any other area that is controlled by the Palestinians is no longer valid. So that from a legal point of view, there is justification in the attacks that are taking place between the Hamas, Hezbollah, Iranian Quds towards the Israelis. There is a legal justification for it. Now, this on every level is absurd. It is a casus belli. It is suggesting that war is appropriate. So, in my judgment, this is one of the worst decisions that has ever been made by an American administration. It is clearly a break with the past. It's a break with diplomatic history.
So, morally, principally, and spiritually, Israel has to just ignore this resolution and keep on building.
I think that's exactly right. However, it's very important to understand that now Israel is in a position where its territories are regarded as illegal by the world community. The Hague Court will call it illegal. Now, this is a rather dramatic word, because what it means is that if you're engaged in illegal actions, then the universe, that is the global universe, has an opportunity, or should have an opportunity, to challenge you. Keep in mind, this is so absurd that even the Jewish quarter in the Old City is considered to be illegal. That is, Jews do not have a right to be in the Jewish quarter of the Old City. You cannot put a message in the Wailing Wall, which is considered to be part of the West Bank. You cannot put a coat of paint over an apartment that may reside in the West Bank. So you're talking about a very different kind of global situation. There will be 70 nations meeting in France, in Paris, on January 15th to discuss the future of Israel. What they will be discussing is the introduction of a Palestinian state imposed on Israel. And there's one other interesting dimension to this. When Jordan controlled the territory we now call the West Bank, most of the people living there were the so-called Palestinians, never identified as Palestinians, but they were Palestinians. There was not one resolution in the United Nations to create a Palestinian state at that time. One might ask the question, why didn't the UN act when it could have done so when Jordan controlled the territory? There wasn't one resolution. So it raises a lot of interesting questions. Why the Jewish state? Why should the Jewish state have to do so when in fact the Jordanian state was not in the same position?
Not to mention the fact that there's no such thing as a Palestinian state.
Absolutely. There's no such thing as a Palestinian people. There is no such thing as a Palestinian state. This is all a fiction of the kind of manipulation we have seen by the Arab world over the last 20 years.
All right, now, so back to the Six-Day War when they regained the West Bank and eastern part of Jerusalem. They're obviously trying to delegitimize that war and somehow make that the Palestinian state. But that's not the case. There was no resolution even after the Six-Day War to do that.
Well, if one looked at the Oslo Accords, there was supposed to be recognition on the part of both parties. There was supposed to be, under UN 242, a belief that the territory would at some point be regarded as negotiable between the parties. So it was never an occupied territory. It was a disputed territory. When Prime Minister Barak was in charge during the Clinton years and was willing to give up 95% of the West Bank to the Palestinians, it was rejected. Arafat wanted something more. His goal, which is the goal of Fatah, the goal of Hamas, is to have an Israel eliminated from the map. The Palestinian state is a state from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean. That's the Palestinian state. That's the Palestinian goal. They had 95% of the territory offered to them. And as Abba Eban noted, the Arabs never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity.
Well, and that was the defining moment of their motive and who they really are and what they want to do. I mean, that was the defining moment. So land will never bring about peace.
Well, land cannot bring about peace. And as I indicated before, this decision in the United Nations may indeed be a casus belli, because now there's legitimacy for the attacks on Israel using the legal accord arrived at the UN. And so Hezbollah can say, we have every right to attack Israel because they are occupying territories illegally.
So back to the Paris conference coming up on January 15th. It's possible that the United States and Israel just don't attend and say to those guys in a nice way, sorry.
Well, Israel obviously does not attend and should not attend. And as far as the United States is concerned, it's 5 days before Trump becomes president of the United States. So whatever is said, Trump will obviously try to undo. The difficulty is that if Trump goes to the Security Council and says, we want to undo this with another proposal, that will be vetoed by Russia or China.
All right, so are we moving to a time, you think, Dr. London, where the United States and Israel will stand alone against all this nonsense?
Well, I think that the Israelis are now isolated in world affairs. They have become a pariah state overnight. Israel, despite all of its overtures to African states and to the Sunni nations nearby, will now be regarded as a renegade property, as a renegade institution. And that is a very, very dangerous phenomenon.
The incoming administration has sent some fairly strong signals, not only those who would negotiate any kind of peace talks, but also the incoming new ambassador sends a fairly strong signal that it will be a new day in relationship between the United States and Israel. Even though that we have a UN resolution that may not be able to be unwound, it's still the United States can still show strong support of Israel against that UN resolution by doing what?
Well, the first thing that I would do if I were Donald Trump is to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Move the embassy to Jerusalem. Move the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem and say it's not a question of East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem. There's one Jerusalem, and that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel.
All right, pragmatically, how does that get done? Because wouldn't that in itself spark some terrorist attacks?
Without question. But I mean, now you have the possibility of terrorist attacks even without that gesture. Because as I've indicated, Hezbollah has every justification for engaging in terrorist attacks because it is merely trying to exercise the legal right that the Palestinians have to territories that presumably were taken away from them.
Let me take a quick break here, Dr. London. We're talking to Dr. Herb London, and let me encourage you to check out his website, londoncenter.org. He is the president of the London Center for Policy Research, a great resource. Check out his book, The Encyclopedia of Militant Islam. It's available at the bookstores. We'll take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
I'm Paulina Leiser, producer of Focus Today. Thank you for watching this video, and make sure to check our other videos at theDove.us.
Welcome back to Focus Today, and as always, an honor to have with us our good friend Dr. Herb London. He's the president of the London Center for Policy Research. His website is londonCenter.org. Check out his book called The Encyclopedia of Militant Islam. It's an incredible resource. You can check that out at Barnes & Noble or online at Amazon. Dr. London, is this current action with the UN, has it nullified its purpose and existence?
Well, I think it challenges the legacy of Obama as someone who has been interested in maintaining world order. If anything, once looks at the Obama administration in 2008 when he took office, and what you find is that the world has become far more disorderly as a result of his intervention or lack thereof. What we find is that from Syria and Aleppo to events that are occurring in Israel at the moment, we have a presidency that has lost its way. It is either mismanaged or not engaged in appropriate management of the key issues that the world is facing. There is one nation in the world that has been stabilized as a result of actions taken by the Obama administration. So I think that the legacy of Obama is that he has undone so much of the positives in American and global foreign policy decisions. And that, I think, is going to be his legacy. He will be regarded as among the worst presidents in American history.
Do you think it really is a presidency that's lost its way, or a president that is absolutely ruled by an ideology that is contrary to America, liberty, and freedom?
These are not mutually incompatible ideas. I mean, the president of the United States is the one who determines the course of the presidency. And especially since he's the commander-in-chief, he's largely responsible for foreign policy decisions. And as I indicated before, what you had is a president who wanted to reset the button with Russia. He has done so, and what it has meant is that the Russians have gained an enormous amount of credibility in the Middle East. Russia has become the strong horse. We are irrelevant, according to the Turkish ambassador and according to Erdogan, the president of Turkey. So, again, the role of the United States in world affairs is in descent. The Russian role is in the ascendancy. And that is true with China as well in the Far East. The Chinese create a unilateral air perimeter in the South China Sea. The United States cannot respond, will not respond, does not respond, aside from sending a B-52 over the territory with a pilot waving to the Chinese below. I mean, it's astonishing to me that the United States has not engaged in any pushback when there are aggressive actions against American interests.
It's been said there's a new sheriff coming to town, and his pushback could be substantial. At the same time, he inherits this mess. I don't even know where he begins to go to work.
Well, I do know where he begins. He begins by trying to restore confidence in allies that have lost confidence in the United States. If I were Trump, I'd visit Sisi in Egypt, sit down with him and talk about the role that the United States can play in creating some sort of maybe informal defense condominium in the Middle East with Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and the Arab Emirates playing a part in providing the kind of military assets that are needed to create the boots in the ground the United States will not deploy. So there are things that can be done. And the first and perhaps overarching responsibility is to once again create the kind of confidence that our allies have to hear from America, that America is prepared to defend and to sustain the ideas and principles that have brought about the alliances in the world that have maintained global stability or relative stability.
It looks like members of Congress now are going to try to push some kind of action against the UN. We're talking about possibly defunding part of it. We're responsible for 22% of its budget. We may cut that back. And some members of Congress are going as far as saying that Palestinian diplomats could not reside within the United States. I mean, these kind of actions could be fairly significant, don't you think?
Well, I think they can be significant, and I think they make some sense. The question is, can you develop some sort of consensus between Democrats and Republicans that would lead to these actions? that's not going to be so easy. But there's no question that there's an awful lot of hostility on the Democratic side directed at Obama, which is, of course, very unusual, because people like Schumer have been far more interested in their personal ambitions than what is the necessary welfare of Americans and New Yorkers. So I think that now you're starting to see the real signs of a Democratic Party coming to grips with what the party stands for and the kind of failures that have been brought about by the leadership in that party.
So could Congress, under a Trump administration, one of the first things they could do, maybe on the Senate and the House side, is to pass a joint resolution within Congress in support of Israel, or at least reaffirming our support of Israel?
I think that that's very likely. And as I indicated to you before, I think that there are probably congressmen and senators at work at this moment attempting to put together some sort of legislation activity that would suggest that this kind of consensus is emerging.
All right. So what about other nations that joined in on this resolution? I know that Israel has sent some indication that they may not be sending aid to Angola, maybe others. What can the United States do to maybe punish those nations that joined this resolution?
Well, it is possible to engage in sanctions. Keep in mind that Egypt had the proposal at the Security Council, and Donald Trump called Sisi and said to him, please back off. And Sisi did, saying that there would be indefinite postponement of this proposal. The United States obviously acted behind the scenes to find 4 other sponsors: Malaysia, Venezuela, New Zealand, and I'm missing one. Venezuela, Malaysia, New Zealand, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the 4th.
Britain. You had Britain in there, and you had Angola in there.
Well, the 4 nations that were responsible for the proposal did not include Angola and Britain, although they voted 14-0 to accept the proposal. Now, what happens? Senegal was the 4th. I'm sorry. Senegal was the 4th nation. What happens is you can punish those 4 nations by engaging in various sanctions against them. That is certainly a possibility. But it's the Security Council acting as a whole that has to be entertained. And that probably means restricting the kind of assistance the United States provides to the United Nations. As you pointed out, 22% of the budget comes from the United States. 25% of the peacekeeping operations come from the United States. So we are the key player in the UN. And if we decide that we're going to cut back or eliminate the financial gift to the United Nations, it's probably over. It would go the way of the League of Nations.
Is that a bad thing?
I don't think so. I mean, considering the way it is acted, and particularly the most recent events towards Israel, that would not be a bad thing. You could also say that the United Nations should not be in New York, that New York should not have a United Nations. The United Nations should probably go to Mogadishu. Let it go to Mogadishu. See how the diplomats feel about shopping in Mogadishu as opposed to Saks Fifth Avenue.
All right. Now, it seems one of the parting shots that is happening here is that the president, Obama, is trying to turn Netanyahu against the United States and Putin against the United States. Now he's talking about sanctions against Russia for its so-called involvement in our election. And Trump has to inherit this relationship. What's your take?
Well, I mean, the Russians have obviously prospered significantly since Obama's been president. And the reason for it is fairly obvious. The withdrawal that the United States is engaged in from the Middle East and the extent to which the Russians have filled this vacuum. The Russians are now the great power in the Eastern Mediterranean. They've sent a carrier force into Tartus, the area in Syracuse, in Syria that they control. So there is no doubt the Russians have prospered. What Trump has to do is to find areas where there's a convergence of interest and areas where there are divergence of interest, and to make it clear that the United States is now engaged in a tabula rasa. The slate is clean. And so what we're saying is whatever Obama did or didn't do no longer applies to the new administration.
It's been thought that President Trump on Inauguration Day could even sign some executive orders from the podium, rescinding some executive orders of President Obama. I don't know what they would be, but they could be fairly significant. What would you think of such a move?
Well, again, I think that President Trump has to carve out for himself a different foreign policy and a different stance on the part of the United States. The first thing is to end sequestration, because the United States is going to have to build up its defenses in a rather dramatic way. It was very clear in Aleppo that the United States could not provide safe zones because we don't have an airplane that could penetrate the SA-300 radars and anti-missile system that the Russians have deployed. And we didn't even want to try because it would be an embarrassment to the Air Force if we could not do so, and also send a signal to the Russians. So the Russians are attempting to gain ascendancy on the world stage, and they have done so. We have got to challenge that at NATO with tank brigades in the Baltics by making it clear to the Russians, we are not the same entity that you dealt with when Barack Obama was president of the United States. And I think Trump has to make that clear right from the outset.
Trump has shown since he's been president-elect, inviting a lot of people to the Trump Tower to talk to them, maybe interview them. And a lot of those people were clearly against him and don't like what he stands for. But they walk away from that meeting somewhat changed. Could that possibly be an indication why he would invite some strong enemies of the United States to the White House for discussions? Maybe a Vladimir Putin?
Well, it is certainly possible. I mean, I think that some of the comments that have been made about how close the two of them are completely erroneous. They've never met. I mean, despite some of the claims made by Donald Trump during the course of the campaign, they have not really gotten together. So now there is an opportunity for them to do so. I think that that would be worthwhile. But I would also keep in mind that Putin comes from the KGB. Deception is part of the game with the KGB. I don't believe that anything that Putin says. And so for me, I think that it's important to engage in those conversations, but engage in them with a degree of skepticism. You can't be entirely clear about the Russian goals. Russia as a society is failing. It has if you look at life expectancy, it is decreasing in Russia. One of the few Western nations in the world in that position. It is suffering from an epidemic of alcoholism. It doesn't have anything that you want to buy aside from its extractive industries in natural gas and in oil. And so it is a country that has little to offer internally. Externally, it has grown into a great power, in part because of Obama's withdrawal from world affairs and the extent to which the Russians have filled that vacuum. So what Putin is trying to do is to recapture the near abroad, to deal with the humiliation of the fall of the Soviet Union, and to create the glories of Russia's past by external activities, not by internal operations.
Wow. Well, I wish I could develop that thought a little more, because I'd like to talk to you next time we connect over the issue of energy. If the United States becomes self-sustaining in energy, does not only economically what that does to us, but politically what that does to us. So I'd like to get your comments on it, but I'm out of time. Good to see you. Listen, people, you can go to londonCenter.org. That's Dr. London's website. Check out his book. This is an incredible read. It's called The Encyclopedia of Militant Islam. Dr. London. And again, London Center for Policy Research. Thanks, my friend. Many blessings to you. Talk to you again soon.
And God bless you for the extraordinary work that you do. And again, all the best for the new year.